Awesome high schoolers, week 4 of what to do when you don't know what to do. You would think at some point we would come up with a shorter name. That's besides the point. We've been looking at the events in Joseph's life. The accounts of his journey, they're found in the Old Testament in Scripture, which basically means that he lived a long time before Jesus was on the scene. And so, quick recap, because it's been like 3 whole weeks. So Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers. He was taken to a foreign country in Egypt, where he was forced to work for a high-powered official. Cool. And then he was falsely accused of doing something that he didn't do and was thrown into prison. So we've got from a free man to a slave to a prisoner. And if anyone had the right to ask the question, what's the point? Why is all this happening to me? It was definitely Joseph. And that's where we pick up. Joseph is in jail for a crime he did not commit. And here he makes some new friends. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 40, starting in verse 1. Sometime later, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officials, the cupbearer and the chief baker, and put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, in the same prison where Joseph was confined. So Pharaoh, we've talked about him, boss of all Egypt. So if he gets mad at you, there's nothing you can do. He can throw you into prison, and that's where you would end up, even if you hadn't done anything even remotely illegal. And that's what happened to these 2 guys. They were thrown into prison with Joseph. And so the story keeps going. After they had been in custody for some time, each of the 2 men, the cupbearer and the baker for the king of Egypt, who were being held in prison, we just got to make sure that you know they're in prison, had a dream the same night. And each dream had a meaning of its own. And when Joseph came to them the next morning, he saw that they were dejected. So he asked Pharaoh's officials who were in custody with him in his master's house, "Why do you look so sad today?" "We both had dreams," they answered, "but there was no one to interpret them." Then Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." So there's like a lot of stuff happening right here. Remember, Joseph is in prison for something that he did not do. And even in this crazy, difficult situation, Joseph is still continuing to call on the Lord and to honor God. The men in prison with him told Joseph their dreams, and with God's help, Joseph told them what they meant. And then what Joseph said would happen actually happened. Based on the dream of the chief cupbearer had, Joseph said that he would be restored to a favorable position. And he was. As for the chief baker, Joseph said that he wouldn't have the same luck, and he did not. Go check out the rest of the story in Scripture. It's pretty crazy, and it's definitely worth your time to read. But you would think, given what Joseph had done to help the cupbearer out, that the cupbearer totally would have walked up to Pharaoh and said, "Thank you, Mr. Pharaoh, for helping me out. I was just locked up with this guy who interpreted my dream to perfection. I know that you have dreams. I know they need interpretation. So you may want to think about getting this dude on your staff and out of prison as soon as possible." Right? That's what would make sense. That's not what happened. The story tells us that the cupbearer completely forgot about Joseph. He got out of jail and just moved on with his life. Yeah, great buddy. Over time, as Joseph was waiting in jail for his friend to remember him, he finally realized that not only did his friend forget him, but all this stuff that he did for his friend didn't help out his situation at all. I'm sure he was tempted to wonder, what is the point of all this? It didn't help me get my life in a better place. Has God forgotten about me? I thought I did what was right, and I'm still here in jail. But then 2 years later, quick pause. First, the scripture tells us that he was in prison for some time, and then it says he was in prison for 2 more years. Homeboy was in prison for a while, and yet, in spite of all of this, he still does a great job of looking to the Lord. I mean, way to go, Joseph. Okay, so moving on. Pharaoh had 2 dreams that were really troubling him, and he was desperately searching for someone on his staff who could interpret them. But no one could. And that's when the cupbearer just magically remembered Joseph. So Pharaoh called on Joseph to interpret his dreams with incredible, and once he was interpreting them, incredible accuracy. As a result, eventually Joseph was made second in charge of all of Egypt. And under Joseph's leadership, Egypt survived a terrible famine, which eventually put Egypt in a position to save Joseph's family, and even people from his homeland who were still suffering from this famine. It was a full 2 years before the cupbearer even remembered Joseph. And even when Joseph was in a position of incredible power, he was still living in a foreign land. So it wasn't like Joseph was able to go home as a free man. And Joseph was still second in command under Pharaoh, which meant that if Pharaoh was having a bad day or had a bad attitude, if he wanted him dead, Joseph would be dead at the snap of his fingers. So no, I mean, things got better, but it didn't make Joseph's life perfect, not even close. But when we step back and we see the bigger picture, middle schoolers, if you're watching, big picture, yeah. If we step back and see the bigger picture and understand the context to this backstory, we see that Joseph's challenging circumstances uniquely positioned him to do something great. Joseph still had to wait for 2 whole years, and all the good things that happened in Joseph's life didn't make the bad ones okay. Being promoted to second in command didn't undo the challenges he faced leading up to that. I mean, the dude still had to protect the land from a famine. That's not a walk in the park. But at the same time, those difficult circumstances, they positioned him and prepared him to do something great. And something that only he would have been able to accomplish. And I mean, he went through some stuff. And the same is true for you and me. Hard times, they are coming if they haven't already in your life. And it's important to remember that just because something happens doesn't mean that it's something that God did to you. And it doesn't mean that it's something that God wanted for you. The reason is because of sin. Sin, I mean, makes life unfair. Things happen that aren't fair and they don't make sense. People hurt other people, and sometimes that hurt is completely out of our control. But when it seems like it's impossible, that anything good can come out of the stuff in our lives, we have to remember that God is really good at doing the impossible. And check this out, Romans chapter 8, verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. It may not make sense, it may not make everything better, but God is in the business of taking our hurt, our difficulties, and our pain and really redeeming them. That means even if something is done in evil and meant for evil in our lives, he can use it for good. Not only for us, but for others. In other words, when you don't know what to do, remember that your problems can position you for a purpose. This doesn't mean that we can tie a bow and slap some perfume on every bad situation and just make it pretty and rosy. And it doesn't mean that everything will be fixed and go back to the way it was before that bad thing happened. I mean, there's still things that I experienced in high school that I'm still asking God why. I'm 28 years old. It just means that we need to leave room for God to tell a new story in our hard circumstances. It means that we can be confident in God's ability to redeem things, to know that good can come from bad. The hardest and the worst things that we've experienced aren't the end of our story. In fact, it could be part of something more. So when we go through pain and when we can't see the purpose of that pain yet, here's some things that can help us get a little bit of a bigger perspective. First, remember that no one else has your life story. Your difficult circumstances, they are not fun, but they are unique to you. They put you in a position to learn, grow, and discover things that no one else can or will. God is using your tough stuff in ways that you can't even imagine because they have shaped you in ways that no one else has been shaped. Now, that may not make it easier, but it may give you some perspective or a way to see things differently. And then number 2, remember that your story can interact with others. Although no one else has your life story, many people do face similar circumstances. And you could be a voice to help them through their own challenges and through their own pain. And help you would not be able to provide that help if you hadn't gone through it yourself. So when you know someone who's going through family drama, you can help them because you've experienced some family drama. When you go through a hard breakup, you can understand how someone else feels when they are going through a hard breakup. When you deal with sickness, illness, or even death, you can encourage people who are going through some of the same things. And when you have big doubts and questions about God, Jesus, your faith, you can be a safe place to talk about those things for other people who are asking questions of their own. You can become a person who looks around and sees other people's struggles and say, oh, you feel that? I feel that too. You've experienced that? I've totally been there. Can I tell you my experience? The truth is, the next best thing to having everything fixed for us is having someone who's been through it walk alongside us in our mess. That's one of the reasons we want to make sure that you have some awesome leaders. The leaders in this youth group have been through stuff throughout their lives. And often they've been through a lot more than you've ever realized. And if you're going through something, one of the best people to talk to are one of those leaders. Even if they never experienced your exact situation, they have a better perspective because of what they've experienced. So, here are 2 quick questions I want to leave us with. What if God used your painful situation to position you for something amazing that you haven't even imagined yet? And the second question, what if the first step is simply asking for His help, asking for God's help? I mean, remember, God is really good at doing some impossible things. Hey, thanks for joining us. That's the end of week 4. Next week is our last week. Week 5 of what to do when you don't know what to do. I'm pumped. I'm excited. It's going to be great because after that, it means that we get to come back in person. September 13th, we're coming back. It's going to be awesome. If you haven't, go ahead and do all the likes, all the bells, all the clickies for the YouTube, and I will see you guys next week. Hopped in to check out this YouTube video. My cat has just jumped up on the screen in beautiful timing as we talk about subscribing